Hey, welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? A quick comment and a subscribe go a long way, it really helps. Now, turn down the lights, and let's begin tonight's case. Have you ever wondered how many people go missing around the world in a single day? How about in a whole year? We dug up these chilling statistics and just imagine, every day 607 people vanish without a trace. In 1 year, that adds up to 221,644 missing individuals. Over the past 20 years, the number reaches a staggering 4,432,880 people. That's more than the entire population of New Zealand or nearly the entire population of Ireland. Think about that for a moment. Almost 4.5 million people from each generation simply disappear. But how is it that, in this age of digital information, people can still vanish? Here's the answer. Some deliberately choose not to be found, while others are kidnapped to fuel the black market for organ trafficking, sex slavery, or for illegal medical experiments. And then there are those twisted individuals who take people simply to fulfill their own vile goals. But sometimes the missing are found, and they become another tragic headline. On October 24, 2019, 19-year-old Anya Blanchard was reported missing by the Auburn, Alabama Police Department. Her parents and relatives launched a massive search campaign, and within days, local authorities joined the effort. Could it be that this young college student's disappearance was just a dramatic teenage stunt? That maybe she'd simply partied too hard or gotten upset with her parents like so many teens do? That kind of behavior might be possible for any other teenager, but not for Anya Blanchard. Anya Haley Blanchard was born on June 22, 2000, to Elijah Blanchard and Angela Haley Harris. The family lived in Homewood, Alabama. Her father was a businessman, and her mother was a registered nurse. When Anya was about 3 years old, her parents split up but maintained a friendly relationship. In 2003, her mother Angela met heavyweight MMA fighter Walt Harris, and soon the two got married. Despite her parents' divorce when she was still a little girl, Anya had a great relationship with both of them. Over the years, she became a part of two different families, finding love and support from her stepmother, Yeshiba Blanchard, and her stepdad, UFC fighter Walt Harris. These two couples and her older brother, Elijah Blanchard Jr., who was just 17 months her senior, meant the world to her. From a young age, Anya had a strong maternal instinct, something she picked up from watching her mother work. Anya's kindness made those around her feel loved and at peace, and she was always ready to listen and lend a helping hand when someone was in need. At 19, Anya Haley Blanchard was the glue that held her family together, bringing them happiness and strength. Anya graduated from Homewood High School, where she had a real passion for playing softball. In 2019, she enrolled at Southern Union State Community College, SUSCC, to study early childhood education. Her dream was to eventually transfer to Auburn University and become an elementary school teacher. On October 23, 2019, Anya and her brother went to visit their mom and stepdad. After dinner, they said their goodbyes and headed back toward the college dorms. Around 11 p.m., Anya dropped her brother off at his place and continued on her way alone. They lived just 10 minutes apart. She let him know that her phone battery was running low, but assured him there was no need to worry since she didn't have far to drive. Later that night, around midnight, Anya called a friend, but after that, Anya never made it back to her dorm. The next day, her family reported 19-year-old Anya Blanchard as missing to the police. One of the biggest red flags that something was seriously wrong was that Anya had left her dog Blue alone overnight. Her mom knew Anya would never do that. That dog was like a child to her. Anya's phone activity ended at 11:47 p.m., suggesting that her phone either died or was turned off around that time. It last pinged near the Clarion Inn area on South College Street. A massive search effort began. Her parents appeared on TV shows, volunteers posted missing person flyers, and search groups combed the areas around where she was last seen. And all that effort paid off. On October 25th, about 50 miles from where Anya disappeared, her 2017 Honda CR-V was found in a Montgomery apartment complex. When police inspected the car, They discovered that the interior was covered in blood, and there were serious dents and damages to the exterior, consistent with the collision. According to law enforcement, the damage occurred sometime between Wednesday and Friday night. Days went by, but there was still no sign of Anya. Her parents were devastated. They continued making appearances on television, desperately trying to keep Anya's story in the public eye, hoping it would lead to more clues about her whereabouts. A week after she was reported missing, 19-year-old Anya Blanchard was still officially classified as a missing person. She was last seen wearing a black dress and brown boots while driving her black Honda CR-V. In an effort to get more people involved and help bring Anya home, a $105,000 reward was offered for any information leading to her whereabouts. But despite the reward, the search for Anya didn't pick up speed. There were almost no solid leads, or if there were, they weren't being followed up on properly. Let's try to piece together the sequence of events and pay attention to any details that law enforcement might have missed. On Wednesday, October 23rd, just before midnight, Anya Blanchard was on the phone with a friend. This was the last time anyone who knew her heard her voice. By Thursday, October 24th, a missing person report had been filed with the Auburn Police Department. We need as many people as possible searching for Anya right now. This is not like her. She would have come home, said Angela Haley Harris, Anya's mother. Late Thursday night, her stepfather, UFC heavyweight fighter Walt Harris, posted a video on social media pleading with the public to help find his stepdaughter. But as the days went by, hope began to fade, and her family and friends were left clinging to the hope that she would return. On October 25th, after Anya's car was found with blood inside, her parents were overcome with despair. On Sunday, October 27th, a vigil was held for the missing teenager who, according to her mother, had been with a man on the night she disappeared. The young man she had just met, that's all. She didn't say where she met him, how she met him, or where they went. She just said she was with this guy she just met. But my daughter wouldn't just go off with a complete stranger, Haley Harris explained. On Monday, October 28th, the police released surveillance footage showing Anya entering a convenience store around 11:21 p.m. to buy some potato chips. By October 30th, a task force had been assembled, made up of more than 60 agencies, including the FB1, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. The disappearance of Anya Blanchard triggered a massive search operation. The multi-agency task force, which included the FB1, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, was actively involved in the search. The case quickly gained national media attention. The only real lead the police had was Anya's damaged car, which was abandoned near an apartment complex in Montgomery. The car showed signs of a collision, and blood was found on the front passenger seat. The Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences confirmed that the blood belonged to Anya Blanchard, indicating she might have suffered a life-threatening injury. Investigators also discovered a bullet hole in the passenger door and shell casings in the left cup holder. Police noted a strong smell of cleaning solution in the car. Despite this, there were still no suspects or solid leads pointing investigators in the right direction. As time passed, detectives had no choice but to dig deeper into the existing evidence. When detectives took a closer look at the surveillance footage from the convenience store where Anya was last seen, they noticed a black man lingering near her. On November 6th, the Auburn Police Department released an image from surveillance footage showing a man who could be of interest in the investigation. Detectives identified the man and were waiting to speak with him. The individual was described as a black man between 20 and 30 years old, weighing around 200 pounds and standing between 5 feet 8 inches and 5 feet 10 inches. He was last seen wearing dark pants, dark shoes, and a camo hoodie with the word Vans printed in white on the back. Police reported that the suspect left the area in a silver or gray Lincoln Town car from the early 2000s. The next day, the man was identified as 29-year-old Ibrahim Yazid from Montgomery. Surveillance footage confirmed that he had been in the store at the same time as Anya. The video shows him buying alcohol while persistently looking over at Anya. He was later caught on camera exiting Anya Blanchard's car from the passenger side. Footage from another gas station showed him getting back into her car on the passenger side again. Afterward, Anya and Ibrahim drove away together. But if the bullet hole was in the passenger seat, why was the blood Anya's? Eyewitness accounts confirmed that on that night, Anya Blanchard and Ibrahim Yazid were seen talking near her car by the store. One witness claimed she saw Ibrahim force Anya into the car before driving off in her vehicle. According to detectives, this witness shared what she saw with a friend, but neither of them intervened to help the stranger. By all accounts, Ibrahim forcibly put Anya in the passenger seat. At the time of Anya Blanchard's disappearance, Ibrahim Yazid already had a long criminal record and was out on a $295,000 bond, facing charges of marijuana possession, robbery, and attempted murder. By age 30, Ibrahim had accumulated almost every crime in the book, including violent offenses except for an actual homicide. The suspect was also accused of attempting to kill 2 police officers in 2012 when he rammed into their car, and was arrested in 2017 for aggravated assault on a police officer. He had a history of assaulting officers with weapons, dealing synthetic drugs, and participating in robberies. In one escape attempt, he even crashed into a police car. Yet, shockingly, the court kept releasing this repeat offender on bail, or giving him minimal punishment. In June 2020, Ibrahim Yazid was charged with the 2018 murder of Stephen Hamby. He was also charged with the attempted murder of a woman who was shot in the face during the same incident that killed Stephen Hamby. Somehow, despite all of this, he was still walking free. Auburn Police Chief Paul Register stated, "Further investigation and analysis of the evidence determined that Yazid was at the same location where Anaya Blanchard was last seen, and he was involved in abducting Anaya against her will. There's no reason to believe that Ibrahim knew Anaya. She may have just been a random target of a carjacking." Officials didn't rule out more arrests and continued searching for any accomplices of the suspect. An arrest warrant was issued for 30-year-old Ibrahim Yazid, who was wanted on first-degree kidnapping charges and had a history of arrests for violent crimes. Authorities actively searching for Yazid warned that the man from Montgomery might be armed and dangerous. On November 7th, police issued an arrest warrant for Ibrahim Yazid on first-degree kidnapping charges. After the warrant was issued, authorities spent about 12 hours looking for him. This happened 2 days after the surveillance footage of the man believed to be Yazid was released. A tip led police to Pensacola, where the Florida Regional Fugitive Task Force tracked him down near an interstate exit. At around 2:30 a.m., Yazid was taken into custody at the Escambia County Jail in Florida on kidnapping charges and later agreed to be extradited back to Alabama. He was denied bail since he was considered a fugitive wanted in another state. Anaya Blanchard's family feared that her warm, bubbly nature might have put her in a dangerous situation, and her willingness to help others led her right into the hands of criminals. "She's just someone who lifts everyone's spirits and brings happiness. She's so full of life. It pains me to say this, but maybe that's what got her into this situation. She was so trusting, and I think someone might have taken advantage of that," her mother said in yet another interview. The family also dismissed rumors that Anaya had plans to meet up with some guy the night she disappeared, stating they went through her social media accounts and confirmed that Anaya hadn't been talking to anyone other than her family and her roommate. One of the last messages Anaya sent was a Snapchat to her roommate saying she was with a guy she had just met. But Haley Harris didn't believe Anaya wrote that message because the wording and style didn't sound like her daughter at all. She chose not to share further details about that message. As investigators suspected, Ibrahim had accomplices who helped cover up the carjacking and were with him the night Anaya went missing. The investigation hit another dead end until police arrested a second suspect, Antoine Squirmy Fisher, on November 22nd. Later, a prosecutor revealed that Fisher had helped Yazid switch to another car and provided him with money when he fled to Florida. Before detectives could fully question Fisher, the kidnapping case had turned into a crime. On November 23rd, police arrested a third suspect, David Johnson Jr., and charged him with hindering prosecution. Charges against Fisher and Johnson were eventually dropped. Lee County District Attorney Brandon Hughes declined to say how Johnson was obstructing the prosecution. A gag order on the case prevents attorneys, prosecutors, and witnesses from talking to the media about the details. According to Fisher, Ibrahim Yazid arrived at David Johnson Sr.'s house on October 24, 2019. Sometime between 5 and 6 a.m. Fisher claimed he saw Anaya Blanchard's car parked near some bushes at that time. Yazid allegedly told Fisher he needed more gas for the stolen vehicle. Fisher drove Yazid to a gas station where they filled up a can with gasoline before returning to Johnson's house. Yazid reportedly told Fisher he needed to grab something, so Fisher drove him north on Interstate 85 towards Shorter. Fisher said they stopped in Montgomery, where Yazid picked up what he needed, an assault rifle. Afterward, they drove to a cemetery off I-85. There, Fisher claimed he saw Yazid dragging something that looked like two legs wrapped in a blanket. Yazid supposedly spent some time in the woods before coming back to the car. By the end of November, hope of finding Anaya alive had all but disappeared. On November 25th, police came across discarded human remains. They were discovered in Macon County, in a wooded area off County Road. Investigators found a skull with what appeared to be a bullet hole in the top. Alongside the remains, they found clothing that matched what Anaya Blanchard was last seen wearing, as well as a lead projectile. On November 27th, the remains were officially identified as those of Anaya Blanchard. An autopsy revealed that she had been killed by a gunshot wound to the head. As a result, the charges against Yazid were upgraded from first-degree kidnapping to capital murder. He was charged with 2 counts of capital murder, one for committing the crime inside a vehicle with a deadly weapon while the victim was in the vehicle, and another for committing murder during a first-degree kidnapping. The preliminary hearing was delayed multiple times due to the COVID-19 outbreak, but the public and Anaya's family patiently awaited the harshest penalty for the man who took their beloved daughter from them. Yazid, accused of kidnapping 19-year-old Anaya Blanchard, appeared in court for a preliminary hearing on November 20th. Yazid's attorney, Elijah Beaver, filed a motion requesting a hearing, simply stating that his client was entitled to a preliminary hearing on the kidnapping charges since, according to him, Yazid didn't kill her but only resisted when Anaya pulled out a weapon. The next hearing took place in June, where Auburn Police Detective Josh Mixon testified about the defense attorneys challenged the prosecution's claim that the crime was committed in Lee County. After reviewing the evidence, Judge Russell Bush found probable cause to present the case to the Lee County Grand Jury. According to court records, Anaya Blanchard fought back against the criminals who tried to steal her car. She knew how to handle a firearm and could defend herself, but the experienced criminal was quicker than the young woman. It's worth noting that on March 6, 2023, Ibrahim Yazid still hadn't entered a guilty plea to any of the charges against him, so he remains in custody without bail as he awaits trial, which has been postponed multiple times due to the COVID-19 pandemic and other legal reasons. However, without bail or a direct dismissal of the case, 34-year-old Ibrahim Yazid will stay in the Lee County Sheriff's Office jail until his final conviction or acquittal. Anaya Blanchard's disappearance and death drew nationwide attention and media coverage. Her death led to the creation of Anaya's Law, which reformed Alabama's bail laws as her accused killer, Ibrahim Yazid, was out on bail when Anaya was killed. The Alabama state constitution guarantees the right to bail for all defendants, except those charged with capital offenses. Yazid had been released on bail after being charged with kidnapping and attempted murder, which are not capital offenses. Anaya's Law expands the exceptions to include other serious crimes like arson, burglary, domestic violence, aggravated child abuse, assault, robbery, kidnapping, human trafficking, rape, sexual torture, terrorism, and homicide. Prosecutors will be allowed to request a bail hearing, which the judge can either grant or deny. If the hearing is held, the defendant will be allowed to testify, present witnesses, and cross-examine witnesses. Prosecutors will need to demonstrate that the defendant is a flight risk or a danger to public safety. The judge can then either approve or deny bail. As of November 8, 2022, Anaya's Law, House Bill 81, was passed by Alabama voters. A scholarship in memory of Anaya Blanchard was established by the Homewood City Schools. In June 2020, a bench in Patriot Park in Homewood was dedicated to her. Story 1. This winged phrase, usually jokingly addressed to citizens on behalf of law enforcement agencies, Unfortunately, even in today's Russia, in many cases, very accurately reflects the attitude of the state apparatus to citizens, their rights, including their right to protect themselves and their loved ones from criminal encroachments. The story of Vera Pektalieva, from the city of Kemerovo in northern Russia, has turned, according to a famous figurative expression, into a cruel reality when no one helped a person who had been begging for help for several hours. But let's not hurry and speak in riddles, but tell the story from the beginning, and perhaps we can understand why in our modern world indifference is the worst sin. Vera Pektalieva was born on September 24, 1997, in the city of Kizilevsk, Kemerovo region. She studied at the Lyceum, where she periodically participated in regional and city events, and once took first place in the festival Rainbow. The girl was very artistic, loved to dance, and was also engaged in the vocal group Kizilevsky Ovaski. Her parents loved their daughter, sincerely rejoicing at her success in music. Naturally, when Vera graduated from school, her mother Oksana thought that her daughter would enter the University of Culture, because she had every chance for a successful career. But her daughter unexpectedly changed her decision, giving her documents to the Kuzba State Technical University of Kemerovo. Vera became a student of the Faculty of Economic Security. She studied very well and dreamed of a career in the Department for Combating Economic Crimes. Vera's parents divorced when she was still young, but relations with her father Eugene remained warm. Vera often came to visit his new family and even spent vacations there. She was welcome in her father's new family. They went on vacation together and made plans for the future. The girl had an example of two families where everyone treated each other with respect, as it should be between relatives. One day in the company she met Vlad Kanyas, who seemed to her a very handsome young man. He was cheerful and courteous. Vladislav and Vera began to meet in 2017. The parents of young people lived in the same house in Kizilevsk in the Kemerovo region and had known each other for a long time. Vera's parents, like all local residents, knew that Vladislav was left without a family early. First, his mother went to build a new life with another man, leaving her young son in the care of his father. Then Vlad's father committed a crime and after the trial committed suicide by shooting himself with a shotgun in front of his son. Death was terrible, and this episode, in which Vlad became an unwilling witness, forever left an imprint in his consciousness. The life of the guy was not easy, and purely humanly he was pitied by many people, but his parents wanted for their Vera a completely different fate. Vladislav was a young man with a complex character, and especially high goals in life did not set, which very saddened the parents of successful Vera. The family discouraged their daughter from meeting with this young man, believing that from a young man brought up in a dysfunctional family, good things should not be expected. But the student in love did not see any threats, continuing her relationship with Vladislav. By the way, few people guessed about them. In her Instagram account, Vera did not exhibit joint photos. Even not all close friends were aware of the romantic part of her biography. The couple spent time together at house parties, in hookah shops, entertainment venues. From time to time, Vlad posted joint romantic photos in his social networks. A friend of Vera, Kira Egorova, recalled that Vera and Vlad repeatedly quarreled, but then reconciled as if nothing had happened. Parents expected that their relationship would come to naught, but the daughter did not stop communicating, but only stopped sharing personal things with them. Vlad stopped coming together with her to family holidays and make common photos. Vera began to hide this relationship, so as not to make her parents worry and listen to long speeches about the fact that Vlad is not suitable for her. But the parents were adamant, because they were sure that Vlad did not love Vera, but used her. They believed that he used her, because he saw in her an opportunity to organize his life, because she had good prospects for the future. Parents planned to help the only daughter with an apartment and future work, and indeed, in the girl's life, everything was going well, which could not be said about her boyfriend. He dropped out of school after 9th grade and did not want to study anymore. He was also reluctant to work, interrupting small earnings from acquaintances. Even a room in the dormitory where Vera and Vlad lived for about a year paid Vera. And once in a conversation with her mother, she blurted out that she realized that Vlad cannot live without her, because he just uses her. After a while, uncooperative guy became jealous of Vera even to friends. forbade her to go out alone, and maniacally began to pursue outside the house. Vera repeatedly tried to talk to Vlad and explained that in order to avoid quarrels, she needs his trust and understanding. But these conversations did not lead to anything. The couple broke up, and now, in November 2019, Vera's mother heard on the phone the words that she had been waiting for a long time. Vera informed her that she and Vlad were parting. The woman breathed a sigh of relief. Did her daughter take off the rose-colored glasses through which she looked at this man? And after a little more than 3 years, the couple finally parted. Vera moved to another dormitory. According to Marina Tokariva, a close friend of Vera, she never complained about Vlad, but recently admitted that they began to quarrel more often and sometimes came to the hand-to-hand. In a frank conversation with her mother, Vera described the details of their relationship, from which her mother concluded that the young man was manipulating her. On January 13, 2020, 23-year-old Vera Pektalova decided to finally break off her relationship with Vladislav Kanius. Around 6 p.m., she came to Vladislav's apartment, located at 28 Leningradsky Prospect, to collect her things and finally put a stop to this relationship. Vera really planned to pack her things, but Vlad was not going to let her go. He arranged a romantic dinner, beautifully set the table. At first they just talked and drank alcohol. Vera drank just a little bit, but Vlad drank one shot after another. When Vera realized that the quiet conversation was turning into a drunken debauch, she was about to leave. Vlad spoke in a high-pitched tone, sometimes even shouting, accusing Vera of cheating on him. He called her foul words and repeated over and over again that he knew she had another boyfriend. Throughout the evening, Vera kept in touch with her friend, periodically sending her voice messages to update her on the progress of the case. Vlad also sent voice messages from her number, asking Vera's friend not to wait for her and not to come, so that he could deal with his friend on his own. When the messages from Vera stopped coming, her friend did not suspect anything wrong, as she had repeatedly witnessed the reconciliation of the couple. From Vladislav Kanius' interview, when I started talking to her about our relationship, suggested that she get back together, and also told her that I knew that she was communicating with another kid, a conflict started between us. She didn't like it. After that, she began to insult me in a foul language. At the same time, she began to hit me. Namely, she gave me at least 5 blows with her foot in the groin area, and at least 8 blows with the palm of her hand on my face. I felt no pain from the blows. However, when she kicked me between my legs, I felt physical pain. That is, Vera started hitting me first. It made me angry. Specifically, it made me angry that she denied the fact that she was dating another guy. In the early morning of January 14, 2020, the residents of Building 28 were awakened by a woman's screams from an apartment on the 7th floor. Neighbors of Vladislav Kanius sounded the alarm when the noise from behind the walls began to be heard, which turned into desperate cries for help. Concerned residents of the building began to call the police, but the law enforcement agencies explained to them that there were no available teams at the moment. Calls to the emergency service and the front office were received for more than 1 hour, and the employees themselves could hear the victims' frantic screams in the background, but still did not hurry to send help to the scene. Time passed, and the screaming did not stop. Residents from other floors also came forward. Many also called the emergency services, begging them to send a squad as soon as possible. The woman dispatcher assured me that she had long ago passed the information to the Lenin Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and that the police were on their way. But this was not the case. After a couple hours, the screams died down. A loud male voice outside the door said clearly, "Vera, I'm sorry. I love you very much." In the end, the neighbors took up the cause and broke down the door, but it was too late. They found Vera in a pool of blood, which could not be saved. After several hours of torture, the girl died. What happened at 28 Leningradsky Prospect 28 that terrible night? And where were the police who could have saved Vera Petalova? To begin with, Vladislav Kanius was not going to let Vera go. A few minutes before her arrival, he spoke to his brother on the phone and told him that he would kill her. The latter immediately went to Leningradsky, but could not prevent the crime. The door was locked, and from the apartment were already coming from women's screams. When the door was broken down, Kanya's brother was the first to enter the blood-drenched dwelling. According to him, things were scattered everywhere, and Vera was lying on the floor with an orange-red face and traces of blood around her mouth. Vladislav was in the bathroom at the time with a knife in his hands and talking to himself. Neighbors called the police again and reported the murder. Only after that, an investigative and operational team went to Leningradsky. I wanted the silence to come. I did not think about her suffering. She screamed, insulted me during our conflict. Striking her did not please me. Striking her, I didn't like that she was yelling. I wanted her to be quiet, the killer repeated while waiting for the task force. Having done the deed, he did not try to escape and surrendered to the operatives without resistance. The girl is dead. The criminal is caught. It remains to wait for punishment and retribution will be realized. But the main question remains, why for more than 3 hours try to save Vera neighbors, and not those people who are obliged to do it by duty? Let's go back to that terrible time when the former boyfriend slowly and sophisticatedly killed the girl and the police showed complete indifference and negligence. 4:52 a.m. From the residents of the hostel on Leningradsky Prospect, 28, received the first call about a fight. A man reported a woman's screams from apartment number 738. The girl was loudly asking for help. At least 15 people had already gathered on the site. 4:55 a.m. By this time, the signal about the fight has already taken the duty police department Major Mikhail Balashov and Captain Dmitry Turitsyn. But there were no ready outfits for departure. It turned out that a week-long exercise was held, about which the dispatchers declared by phone. For this reason, often there is simply no one to work. Usually, such events are held for 60 to 70 police officers on a regular basis. For 58 a.m., Major Mikhail Balashov, the shift superintendent, complains to a fellow officer that he has no one to send to the call. All the squads are allegedly busy. There are no people. 10 minutes later, he dials someone else's number. And again, he asks for reinforcements, but he is refused everywhere. There is no one to send on the call. In the meantime, neighbors continue to cut off the emergency phones. Everyone's nerves are on edge. At the same time, the dispatcher's office of the District Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs is also trying to solve the issue. But then it turns out that traffic police inspectors do not want to go to the apartment, referring to the fact that it is not their area of responsibility. Someone does not have gasoline to go to the place. Others have a flat tire, so passes an hour and a half. Major Balashov did not send an outfit to Leningradsky Prospect. He couldn't find anyone to send. But at 5:10 a.m., he sent an outfit to find the body of an old man. And at that time, Vera was screaming and calling for help. 5:21 a.m., the major decided to get some rest. He was replaced by Captain Dmitry Turitsyn. The captain also received a signal about the massacre on Leningradsky and did nothing either. 5:28 a.m., Officer Maria Duneva was laughing on the phone, saying there's no one to send to the call, and that about 15 people were already trying to break into the apartment. She added that the girl was still screaming at the top of her lungs and ended the call with, "All right, everything's fine. It's okay." And Vera could have been saved in time. There was time. The sadist was in no hurry. But the police weren't in a hurry either. 6:35 in the morning. They still hadn't sent a unit to the scene. That's when the neighbors finally found a metal crowbar. The men started breaking down the door. Breaking it down, they saw the girl's motionless body. Blood was smeared on the floor, on the walls. The police were still out. After breaking into the apartment and finding the girl already dead, the neighbors called the emergency services again. An hour and a half ago, the service was called. So far, no one has arrived. The girl yelled, "Help, save." But no one helped or saved. We broke the door with our own strength. The girl is already dead. What should we do? It is worth noting that when the emergency service received a signal about the death of the girl, the squad arrived at the address after 15 minutes. Charges under the article murder committed with particular cruelty were brought against 23-year-old Vladislav Kanyas. Trial proceedings in the case of Vera Pektaleva began in February 2021. In the dock, Vlad Kanyas gave out his version of the murder, according to which he hit Vera 4 times and then strangled her. At the court hearing, he said that he did not want to kill Vera and wrapped a wire from an iron around her neck to scare and put her to sleep. And when he realized what had happened, it was too late. This was at odds with the testimony of neighbors who heard the woman's heartbreaking screams for 3.5 hours. The parents managed to get the case reclassified only after the story was publicized. Now, Vladislav Kanya's crime was under the article on murder with particular cruelty, Part 2 of Article 105 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. The accusation was also toughened for the policeman. In addition to the 2 officers who had already been prosecuted, 3 more policewomen were brought in, who did not care about the women's screams on the other end of the wire. According to the lawyer of the injured family, the expert examination showed that Vera Pektaleva's injuries were inflicted over a long period of time. The scheme drawn up by forensic experts shows that Vlad left no living place on the victim's body. Before pathologists presented a terrible picture: bruises, abrasions, cuts, lacerations. Almost half of the blows were on the girl's face. The furious tormentor tried to inflict as much pain as possible. He struck not only with his hands and feet, he used heavy objects, and then Kanyas took up a knife. This is all confirmed by the data of 2 forensic examinations. It is established that Kanyas, having cut Vera's body twice with a knife, decided to take another knife, a sharper one, and he used it to inflict 5 more wounds. No, he didn't want to kill Vera all at once. He deliberately prolonged the pleasure. It took hours of makeup to prepare Vera for the funeral. The deceased was wearing a throat-covered dress. But even all this did not help to hide the consequences of brutal abuse. A month later, the investigative committee opened another criminal case against Mikhail Balashov, head of the duty shift of the Leninskaya Police Department, and Dmitry Teretsyn, senior operational duty officer. They were charged under Article 293 of the Criminal Code, negligence. According to the investigative committee's version, having received a report that a girl was calling for help loudly in the apartment of a house on Leningradsky Street, they did not send a squad there. Balashov and Teretsyn refused to cooperate with the investigation and did not admit guilt. According to them, when the call came from Leningradsky, the department's investigative team was at a different address, where they had earlier found a man's corpse. Also, police officers pointed to problems with fuel. For example, gasoline in one of the cars of the immediate response team ran out at 3 in the morning, while the reports from Leningradsky came after 4 in the morning. The fate of the police officers who did not react to the series of alarm signals remained in question for a long time. At the beginning of March 2021, they were still not suspended from service and continued to work in law enforcement. It is known that the officers denied guilt and refused to cooperate with the investigation. However, the case received a public outcry, and human rights activists sought to ensure that the perpetrators were punished according to their actions. In July 2022, the Kemerovo court announced the sentence of the criminal. Vladislav Kanyas received 17 years of imprisonment instead of the 23 years requested by the prosecutor's office to be served in a strict regime colony. In addition, compensation to Vera's parents in the amount of 1.5 million rubles was imposed. Vera's parents were sure that the case was investigated under the article murder committed with particular cruelty. But when the case file was submitted to the court, it became known that the article was reclassified to a more lenient one, which came as a big surprise to them. There were no official explanations for this, but in an informal conversation, one of the prosecutor's office employees said that for the article special cruelty, there should be at least 100 stab wounds on the victim's body. In his last word, Vlad insisted that the victim provoked him on his own and he did not want a tragic ending. Vera Pektaleva's father remained dissatisfied with the result. He believes that Vladislav's sentence was softened because of the police case, which was still under consideration. Relatives of the deceased were intending to file a lawsuit in the Court of Appeal to increase the sentence of Vladislav Kanyas up to life imprisonment. In the summer of 2023, the court sentenced 5 police officers. 3 of them, Major Mikhail Balashov, Captain Dmitry Teretsyn, and dispatcher Maria Ponomarieva, received 2 years suspended sentence. Dispatchers Maria Donieva and Kristina Yudentseva, a year and a half. The case received a wide public resonance, including due to the lack of proper reaction of law enforcement agencies. But after a while, the story took an unexpected turn. It became known that Vladislav Kanius, sentenced for a brutal murder, could be pardoned. In 2023, the convict was in the troops located on the territory of Ukraine. Vera's mother stated that she saw a picture of the criminal in military uniform on the internet. Upon the woman's request to the Federal Penitentiary Service, the FSIN received a reply that back in April, the convict was sent to the disposal of the Gufsin in Rostov region. The relatives assumed that there, the young man could sign a contract for military service and be free. In the fall, Vera's parents learned that Kanius had been pardoned by the president, with release from further punishment and removal of the criminal record. Later, Vera Pektaleva's father added that Vladislav was also released from paying compensation to her family. However, the bailiffs clarified that it was only a question of suspending payments for the time of Kanius' participation in military operations. In May 2024, it became known that the employees of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, due to whose negligence, among other things, the tragedy occurred, were awarded to pay the injured party only 700,000 rubles. Initially, the victims in the criminal case indicated in the claim the amount 10 times more. But why do we have to wait so long for help in the modern world? Because we are afraid. Afraid to get into other people's conversations, altercations, or fights. What if they're not killing people? Or from indifference we will save a person, and we will turn out to be an unnecessary witness to a family drama. And, what is even worse, we will suffer ourselves. But agree, it is better to look like a living fool who tried to help than a soulless witness of a crime. Summarizing, I would like to note that in recent years the topic of domestic violence is becoming more and more acute in the world. Multiple tragedies and murders make human rights activists think about tougher punishment. Vera Pektaleva's name was added to the sad summary of crimes committed, including those motivated by jealousy. Vera's convicted ex-boyfriend, at whose hands she died, and the police officers who did not come to the rescue, are not in prison now, but continue to live their lives. Hardly any of them feels the torment of conscience, because they continue to wake up every day, see and kiss their relatives, can hear birds singing and feel the breeze. And Vera's relatives still have to learn to do all the same things, but without her, their only daughter. Amnestied Vlad Kanius used his legal right. He went on a special military operation to atone for his guilt with blood. That's the law, whether one likes it or not. The only pity is that you and I will not know whether Vlad Kanius will really redeem his guilt with blood, or will return home with orders for bravery and courage. Story 4. Behind closed doors, you never really know what's happening in someone's home. Sometimes, not even the closest relatives or friends have a clue. What may look like a picture-perfect family from the outside could be hiding a deadly threat behind the scenes. Often, people are too scared to share their troubles, not wanting to burden or upset their loved ones. It feels easier to face hardships alone than to drag others into their pain. But what happens when the issue is domestic violence? What if the partner feels untouchable, already instilling fear and submission in their significant other? In situations like this, victims often find themselves equally afraid of the physical abuse as they are of their partner leaving. The story of Yulia Fairman shocked the entire city of Samara in January 2013, when a well-known young businessman brutally took the life of his wife and tried to make it look like a suicide. The case stirred up public outrage after it was revealed that the perpetrator faced absolutely no consequences for his crime. Alexander Fairman was found guilty of taking the life of the mother of his child. But somehow, the investigation's findings mysteriously shifted, and the incident was chalked up to a state of temporary insanity. Now, 11 years later, Yulia's family is still fighting to find justice and see her killer punished. Yulia and Alexander, a love story. Yulia Sergeyevna Fairman, née Namova, was born on August 21, 1986, in the city of Samara, located in the Middle Volga region of Russia. She came from a humble, working-class family. Her father, Sergei Naumov, worked as a driver, and her mother, Ludmila Ivanovna, was employed in the food service industry. Yulia's childhood wasn't easy, but her parents did everything they could to ensure she never went without. They were determined to give her a good upbringing and the best education they could afford. In 1993, Yulia started attending Samara's public school Hash 67, where she graduated in 2003. With her diploma in hand, she went on to study management at the Faculty of Economics and Management at Samara State Academy. She earned her degree in 2007, and soon after, she landed a job at a major local car dealership called VIP Auto. It was here that she met a young man named Alexander, and their romantic journey began. Alexander Mikhailovich Fairman was also a native of Samara. He was born in 1985 into a well-off family. During the 1990s, his father, Mikhail Fairman, amassed a fortune in the farming business. He became one of the wealthiest and most well-known figures in the city, raising cattle, owning factories that produced dairy products sold nationwide, and running beekeeping operations to sell honey and other bee products. His biggest success, however, came with the establishment of LLC Teplishny, one of the most successful agricultural enterprises in the Samara region and the entire Volga economic district. After finishing college, Alexander also briefly worked at the VIP auto dealership, where he met Yulia. The young, beautiful woman immediately caught his eye and he began courting her. Unfortunately for Yulia, she responded to his attention, and they started a whirlwind romance that felt like a fairy tale at first. The couple dated for about a year and a half until, in 2009, Alexander officially proposed. According to friends and family, Alexander orchestrated a romantic surprise for Yulia when he proposed. He visited her unannounced, led her to the window, and gave a signal to his friends waiting outside. They released a balloon that had a small box attached to it, containing a beautiful engagement ring. He caught the balloon, slipped the ring onto her finger, and asked her to become his wife. Overwhelmed with happiness, Yulia couldn't hold back her tears and said yes. The wedding took place later in 2009, shortly after their engagement. Alexander's parents spared no expense, throwing their beloved son a lavish celebration. They organized a massive party with a long guest list, a giant Hummer limousine, the city's most prestigious banquet hall, a trendy master of ceremonies, and an epic fireworks display to close out the evening. Yulia's bridesmaids recalled how she glowed with joy, looking every bit like a fairy tale princess. Married life to outsiders, the couple's life seemed picture-perfect and happy. They had a well-furnished apartment on Stavropolsky Street, and they were living comfortably without any financial worries. By then, Alexander had started working at his father's company, LLC Teplishny, where he took on the role of executive director. Soon after the wedding, the couple started thinking about growing their family. However, for over a year, Yulia couldn't get pregnant. Now, Alexander's relatives claimed that the first real cracks in their marriage began showing during this time. But when the pregnancy test finally displayed those two long-awaited lines, they both believed that the arrival of a baby would save their marriage and strengthen their bond. Based on the joyful photos Yulia shared on social media, it was clear they were eagerly anticipating the arrival of their child. On September 6, 2011, Yulia gave birth to a baby boy, whom they named Pavel. A few days later, Yulia posted on her social media, thanking everyone for their well wishes and announcing that the baby was born weighing 9 pounds 6 ounces and measuring 23.6 inches in length. During her maternity leave, Yulia cherished every moment with her baby, as evidenced by the photos of her and little Pavel. From the outside, her life looked like a dream: a loving husband, a healthy baby, a cozy home, financial security, and a strong family. Many of her friends envied her, but everything came crashing down in an instant, and the illusion of a perfect family vanished like smoke. The terrifying late-night call. In the early hours of January 4th, a phone call shattered the silence in the Naumov household. Half asleep, Ludmila Ivanovna picked up the phone, not fully comprehending what was being said. It was her son-in-law, Alexander, on the other end, coldly informing her that Yulia was no longer alive. It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She couldn't believe it, thinking it must be some kind of cruel, senseless joke. She started screaming and crying, which brought her terrified husband rushing in. From that moment, everything felt like a nightmare. According to Ludmila Ivanovna, she and her husband quickly threw on some clothes, rushed outside, and flagged down the first car that came by, begging the driver to take them to their daughter's apartment. Within about 15 minutes, they arrived at the building on Stavropolsky Street. where an ambulance was already parked near one of the entrances. Barely aware of herself, Ludmilla ran to the paramedics, but they just shrugged, offering their condolences and telling her there was nothing more they could do. Outside stood Yulia's mother-in-law, Elena Furman, holding little Pasha, their 1.5-year-old grandson. Desperate for answers, Ludmilla ran over to her, but all she could gather from Elena's words was that Yulia was gone. The Naumovs then made their way up to the apartment, and what they saw was horrifying. There were faint bloodstains on the floor, leading to the bathroom. Inside, lying on the floor by the door, was the lifeless body of their daughter. Her hair was tangled and matted with blood, covering her face. Her mother couldn't bring herself to approach. She started to lose consciousness and had to be carried into another room. When Ludmilla Ivanovna regained some composure, her son-in-law, Alexander, came over, thrusting a phone in her face, insisting she take a look at what her daughter had done. She could barely make sense of anything around her, but he kept pushing until she finally took the phone. Struggling to focus, she read a strange farewell letter. In this message, Yulia supposedly confessed to cheating on her husband 6 months earlier and said she couldn't forgive herself. She wrote that she didn't know how she could go on if her actions destroyed her family and ruined their child's life. The odd crime scene at first, Alexander claimed that Yulia had taken her own life. He said that she had been overwhelmed with guilt over her alleged affair, and it consumed her to the point that she couldn't cope anymore. According to him, she had acted strangely that evening. They argued, and afterward, Yulia went into the bathroom. After some time, he noticed she'd been in there too long. When she didn't respond to his knocks, he opened the door to find her hanging from the doorknob, a hairdryer cord wrapped around her neck. He claims he tried to revive her by performing CPR, but when he realized there was nothing he could do, he called emergency services and his parents to help with the child. Only after paramedics confirmed that Yulia was gone did Alexander call his mother-in-law to inform her of what had happened. He remained in the apartment the whole time, interacting with the medical personnel and law enforcement who arrived on the scene. However, Alexander didn't behave like a grieving widower. He seemed disturbingly calm, but once Ludmilla Ivanovna arrived, he grew visibly irritated. He showed no sympathy for her. In fact, he seemed intent on making her pain even worse. Yet what truly caught the investigators' attention wasn't Alexander's odd behavior, but the state of Yulia's body. Forensic experts discovered 2 ligature marks on her neck. One was very pronounced, suggesting she had been strangled. The second mark, faint and at a different angle, indicated hanging, but seemed to have appeared after she had already died. Additionally, there were numerous other injuries on her body and various stages of healing, but more on that later. Another curious detail: upon discovering his wife's body, Alexander's first call was not to the emergency services, but to his parents and a relative who worked at the hospital. They arrived at the scene even before the paramedics did. What was wrong with the farewell message? When her son-in-law first showed Ludmilla Ivanovna the message on her daughter's phone, she was in a state of shock, barely processing anything after losing her daughter. From the start, she doubted that her daughter had written that message, and she had good reasons to think so. First, Yulia had never sent her mother a text message before, knowing that due to her poor eyesight, her mom didn't read texts at all. Second, Yulia never addressed her mother in the way the farewell note did. Third, Ludmilla was absolutely certain that her daughter would never leave her child behind. Her whole life revolved around him. Moreover, experts determined that the message was sent after Yulia's heart had already stopped beating. Alexander explained this by claiming that Yulia might have typed the message and left it in drafts, and when he was trying to call for medical help, he accidentally sent his wife's final message to her mother without realizing how it happened. Additionally, Yulia's phone revealed a chat with a close friend, where she confided about problems in her marriage and her husband's violent behavior. Although she didn't go into much detail, it was clear she was afraid of Alexander. In one of her last messages, Yulia wrote that she would stay strong for her son, as she couldn't leave him and absolutely couldn't afford to die. The initial theory after examining Yulia's body and the crime scene, investigators concluded that this wasn't a case of suicide, but a crime that had been poorly staged to look like one. Alexander immediately became the prime suspect, was taken into custody, and sent to a detention center while the investigation unfolded. At first, Alexander continued to insist that his wife had taken her own life. He accused her of infidelity, claiming that guilt and remorse drove her to such a desperate act. However, the forensic report clearly indicated that Yulia had been violently killed. According to the preliminary theory, on the evening of January 3rd, the couple got into a heated argument over a trivial matter. During the altercation, Alexander beat and strangled his wife, then tried to stage her death as a suicide. On January 18th, he was officially charged with the crime. His detention period was extended, and the investigation continued. Soon after, Alexander admitted that he and his wife had a big fight that night. He confessed to hitting her and grabbing a hairdryer that was nearby, but claimed he couldn't remember what happened next. He only came to his senses when he saw Yulia lying lifeless, blood on the floor, and the hairdryer cord around her neck. Alexander stated that his only concern at that moment was to make sure their 1.5-year-old son, Pavel, wouldn't wake up and see what had happened. After managing to put their son to sleep, Alexander started cleaning the blood stains off the floor. He then moved his wife's body to the bathroom, where he hung it from the hairdryer cord on the door handle to make it look like a suicide. He insisted that he couldn't remember how he did all this, claiming he had some sort of memory blackout. The first psychological and psychiatric evaluation concluded that Alexander was fully sane at the time of the crime and was fully aware of his actions. However, in the months that followed, things began to take a dramatic turn. The funeral and custody battle on January 5th, Yulia's body was brought home from the morgue to prepare for her funeral. That same day, Alexander's parents came to the Naumovs' apartment, asking for forgiveness for their son and themselves, as much as they could be forgiven. After that, they left, and neither they nor anyone else from the Furman family attended the memorial service or the burial. The funeral took place the next day, on January 6th. More than 100 people came to pay their respects to the young woman taken too soon, but not a single member of the Furman family showed up. A few days later, after starting to come to terms with her grief, Ludmila Ivanovna began the process of seeking custody of her grandson. She went to the proper authorities, who informed her about the documents and paperwork she needed to gather. For several weeks, she visited various specialists, including doctors and psychologists, but once all the documents were ready, Ludmila received an unexpected refusal. The child welfare authorities decided to leave little Pasha with his paternal grandparents because they were wealthy and could provide a more comfortable lifestyle for him. The young boy now lived in a large suburban cottage in the Volsky district, and Ludmila and her husband were only allowed to take their grandson on weekends, which they did as often as possible. So, who was really cheating? That farewell message found on Yulia's phone was written and sent by her husband, the killer, as noted earlier, after she had already died. Despite Alexander denying this repeatedly, there was no doubt about it. He simply made up a fictional lover to frame the tragedy as the consequence of a guilty, unfaithful wife's remorse. He created and typed the text on the fly. A thorough investigation and witness interviews revealed that Yulia had no and couldn't have had any affairs. After giving birth to her son, she devoted herself entirely to him, spending every moment by his side and hardly ever leaving him. She was even willing to endure the beatings from her abusive husband just to keep the family together, hoping that things would eventually get better for little Pasha's sake. As for Alexander, he wasn't so innocent. He had been having an affair, not even bothering to hide it. He was seen multiple times with a young woman who lived nearby, and their relationship was clearly more than just friendly or neighborly. According to Elena, Yulia's cousin, she had seen Alexander and this woman embracing in his car shortly before the tragedy, but she only shared this with her mother, who later confirmed it. On New Year's Eve, Alexander started an argument with his wife, then left to celebrate the holiday with friends, and the same woman, Yulia, not wanting to upset her parents, kept this to herself but confided in her best friend, someone she could always trust. The new evaluation changed everything. A second psychological evaluation conducted in May 2013 suddenly concluded that Alexander was in a state of temporary insanity when he committed the crime against his wife. As a result, the charge of murder, which carried a sentence of up to 15 years in prison, was reclassified to a crime committed in a state of temporary insanity, instantly reducing the potential sentence to just 3 years. For some reason, nobody seemed bothered by the fact that, after killing his wife, Alexander had gone to great lengths to stage her death as a suicide, which is not typical behavior for someone in a state of temporary insanity. He washed the floor to hide evidence of the beating, and even sent a fake farewell message to Yulia's mother, pretending it was from her. The lawyer's moves and the custody battle. Alexander's lawyer immediately pushed to change the conditions of his client's detention, and by the end of May, Alexander was released under a travel restriction order. Essentially, this meant he was free to walk around and continue his life while awaiting trial. Yulia's parents were devastated by this decision and appealed to the prosecutor's office, demanding a third psychological evaluation. This time, specialists from the Serbsky State Research Center for Social and Forensic Psychiatry in Moscow were brought in, and it took about 3 months to get the results. However, the psychiatrists only reaffirmed that the accused had acted in a state of temporary insanity. As for the original evaluation, which indicated that Alexander had been fully aware and had intentionally tried to cover up the crime, it was claimed that the specialists had simply made an error, misinterpreting the accused actions and behavior. Meanwhile, Alexander repeatedly changed his statements, describing his condition that night in a way that sounded straight out of a textbook definition of temporary insanity. The trial begins. The first hearing in the Fairman case took place on January 22, 2014, at the Kurovsky District Court in Samara. According to Alexander, the problems in their relationship began even before the wedding, when they moved in together. He claimed that Yulia had a sense of entitlement and high expectations, demanding only the best. He said that the extravagant wedding, the expensive limousine, and all the luxuries were her whims, which he and his parents catered to. Alexander said that after the wedding, he and Yulia tried unsuccessfully for over a year to conceive a child, which worsened their relationship, and Yulia even started talking about divorce. When their son, Pavel, was finally born, things didn't improve. The defendant claimed that his wife was completely consumed by the baby and had no interest in him, caring only about his paycheck. Alexander's parents backed up his claims, accusing their daughter-in-law of being greedy and materialistic. Alexander described a stifling atmosphere at home that kept escalating, saying that his once-beloved wife had grown distant and he had no one to talk to about it. On the night in question, the young businessman said he and his wife had another huge fight, during which she brought up divorce again. According to him, she started yelling that she would take their son and prevent him from seeing the boy. At this point, Alexander claimed he felt his mouth go dry, his ears started ringing, and then he blacked out. When he came to, Yulia was already dead. He admitted that he carried her body to the bathroom and cleaned the blood off the floor to avoid scaring their son, but he didn't explain why he decided to stage her death as a suicide. The defendant also continued to deny ever hitting his wife, dismissing the numerous bruises and cuts on her body as the result of playing rough with their child. It was clear that Alexander and the lawyer hired by his wealthy father had prepared well. The defense attorney argued that his client had committed the crime under a cumulative state of temporary insanity. This meant that Yulia had allegedly insulted, humiliated, and oppressed him for a long period, creating a state of constant psychological tension. In other words, they were essentially blaming the victim for her own tragic fate. Initially, the prosecutor sought an 8-year sentence for intentional manslaughter. However, the seasoned defense attorney quickly managed to get the charge downgraded back to a crime committed in a state of temporary insanity, reducing Alexander's maximum possible sentence to just 3 years in a penal colony. A slap on the wrist for a killer throughout the trial. There were several odd occurrences. First, the forensic psychologist from the original panel, who had concluded that the defendant acted intentionally and was fully sane, suddenly vanished and never reappeared in court. Then, any mention of the bruises and cuts on the victim's body seemed to disappear, as if they had never existed or were somehow deemed irrelevant. Meanwhile, the victim herself was increasingly portrayed in a negative light at every hearing. On August 8, 2014, Alexander Mihailovich Fairman was found guilty of a crime committed in a state of temporary insanity and was sentenced to just 2.5 years of probation. In other words, he didn't serve any jail time. He went back home, with his only punishment being the requirement to regularly check in with the Federal Penal Service and pay 1 million rubles in moral damages to Yulia's parents. Despite the prosecution originally seeking 3 times that amount, the court took into account Alexander's supposed remorse, including the fact that he had apologized to his in-laws and that he had a young son to support. However, the Naumovs immediately announced their intention to appeal the sentence, even aiming to take it to the Supreme Court. Nevertheless, their appeals were dismissed. Their attempt to challenge the verdict at the Samara Regional Court's cassation instance was also unsuccessful. The sentence remained unchanged. Ludmila Ivanovna pointed out that the Russian criminal code provides a harsher punishment, including actual prison time for animal cruelty. The grieving mother couldn't understand why her life was valued even less than that of a stray dog, and she continues to hope for justice. Over 11 years have passed since the tragedy, yet the case remains stagnant. According to Fairman's lawyer Galina Kislyakova, there was never any evidence that the crime was premeditated, and therefore the court's verdict stands. She considers the victim's mother's complaints to be baseless and purely emotional, lacking any legal substance. Still with me? Good, that means you're ready for the rest. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more cases just like this one. Story 3. Think about what you really know about abusive relationships, especially if you grew up in a loving home where your parents never raised their voices. Chances are, your understanding comes from things you've read online or heard in conversations with friends or coworkers. But abuse is a lot more than what you might think. It's all about controlling and restricting another person. Today, we're going to focus on one of the most brutal forms of aggression, and we'll keep coming back to it throughout this discussion: the restriction of personal freedom. Abusive people often feel entitled to control every aspect of their partner's life. Who they talk to, who their friends are, where they go, what they wear, and what time they come home. Sounds awful, right? But what's even worse is that these people think they're being generous. In their minds, they're giving freedom by allowing their partner to do things that, in a healthy relationship, wouldn't even be up for debate. Our heroine refused to live by the rules that were forced on her, and it cost her her life. So, let's start the story and figure out if there really was abuse in this family, or if the public just wanted to paint the husband as an abuser to hold him accountable for his wife's murder. Cary, North Carolina, is the perfect town for quiet family life. It's so safe that after living there for years, people stop locking their cars or even the front doors of their homes. There's no crime or racial tension, great schools, open roads, and friendly, smiling neighbors. This is the town the Coopers chose to start their family and build a happy life. Brad and Nancy Cooper seemed to live the perfect life outside their home. Brad was a smart, successful IT engineer. Nancy was athletic, beautiful, fun, and the best mom to their 2 young daughters. They led a calm, quiet life. Brad worked, and Nancy took care of the house and the girls. Nancy, a former competitive runner, made sure she stayed in shape and took great care of herself. July 12, 2008, started out like any other day. Nancy went out for her morning run, but she never came back. What happened next is disturbing, complicated, and will leave you wondering what really happened. The story is so tragic that all it left Nancy and Brad's family with were questions and a small hope for justice. That afternoon, Jessica Adam called emergency services to report her close friend Nancy Cooper missing. Her voice shaking, Jessica told the dispatcher that Nancy had gone for a run at 7 a.m., but hadn't returned home. The 2 friends had plans to meet, but Nancy never showed. Even worse, Jessica had tried to reach her for hours, but neither Nancy's cell phone nor her home phone answered. Brad was at work and didn't take his wife's disappearance too seriously. He assumed Nancy had just taken a longer walk than usual and would be back soon. But even by evening, she still hadn't returned. To understand where Nancy might have gone, let's take a closer look at the history of the Cooper family, and maybe some answers will emerge on their own. In the 1960s, University of British Columbia graduate Harry Renz and Donna Audrey decided to make their relationship official by getting married. Over the next few years, they had 4 children, a son named Jeff and 3 daughters, Krista, Jill, and Nancy. Living in Edmonton, they raised their children in a loving, supportive home. In 1988, Carrie and Donna started an employment agency that helped people in Alberta, Canada with life management, job training, and employment services. Nancy Renz was born on October 25, 1973, as an identical twin to her sister Krista. Nancy met Brad Cooper in Calgary in 1998 when she was just 24 years old. Tall and dark-haired, Brad immediately caught Nancy's eye, but it wasn't just his looks that won her over. It was his calm, steady personality. He was reliable like a rock. Nancy fell in love. The feeling was mutual. Nancy was also tall, blonde, fit, and had a quiet charisma that stirred something in Brad's heart. Their relationship moved quickly, and when Brad got a prestigious job offer from Cisco Systems in Raleigh, North Carolina, he wanted Nancy to move there with him, to make the immigration process to the U.S. smoother and stay together. Brad and Nancy got married in the fall of 2000. At first, it might seem like they got married for immigration reasons so Nancy could move with Brad, but the couple had already been planning a wedding for the fall of 2002. After they moved to North Carolina, Brad started building his career at one of the largest companies, while Nancy was forced into the of a stay-at-home mom. Brad's career took off. At Cisco Systems, he became a specialist in combining internet technologies and phones, working as a VoIP engineer and architect. Brad was one of just 152 experts in networking technology. The family lived comfortably. Each of them had their own BMW in the driveway. But Nancy became a prisoner in her own home. To be in the U.S. as a Canadian citizen, you can visit, but you can't work without a permit. Over the next few years, the couple had two beautiful daughters, Bella in 2004 and Katie in 2006. Neighbors said Nancy was a loving and hands-on mom who spent lots of time playing with her kids at the playground. But she didn't have a job, and she really couldn't since she didn't have a U.S. work permit. Sure, she was still a Canadian citizen, and she could have found some under-the-table job to earn a little cash. But Nancy dreamed of having a career and being more than just a wife and mom. Now let's talk about Brad. Bradley Graham Cooper was born in the early 1970s in Medicine Hat, Alberta. After high school, he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in computer science from the University of Calgary. After graduating, he landed a job at TransCanada Pipelines as a network engineer. In 1998, he crossed paths with Nancy Renz, and sparks flew instantly. Over time, he grew close not only to Nancy, but also to her family, including her parents, impressing them with his tech skills by helping with their computers and joining in all the family events. His talent and expertise eventually earned him a job offer from Cisco Systems in Raleigh, North Carolina. In 2005, Brad began working toward an MBA at North Carolina State University's College of Management. He went on to complete the degree, specializing in product innovation. While Brad's career was skyrocketing and he kept adding to his skill set, Nancy became his shadow. She had to give up her dreams and her own career. Nancy was once a runner who had hoped to compete in the Olympics. A bad knee ended that dream, but she still ran marathons and other races, bringing new people into the running community and making new friends, something that annoyed the more introverted Brad. Before long, their relationship started to deteriorate. According to friends, cracks in Brad and Nancy's marriage were there from the beginning, but Nancy never aired their issues in public and tended to idealize her husband. On the surface, they still seemed like the perfect family, but as Brad climbed the corporate ladder, he became more controlling and manipulative with Nancy. To him, she seemed like a boring housewife who had lost her spark, spending her days cleaning and taking care of the kids. Things got even worse when Nancy found out that her husband had been cheating on her with her close friend Heather in the spring of 2007. Brad denied it for months, but on New Year's Eve, he finally confessed, admitting to the affair, but insisting it had only happened once, as if that somehow made it better. So one time doesn't count, right? The couple decided to work on their marriage and started going to couples therapy, where Brad admitted he had lied and told Nancy that his affair with Heather had been going on for a long time. After that truth came out, they decided to split up and sell the house. Nancy planned to move back to Canada with the kids, but Brad wasn't willing to give up custody of the girls or let them go to Canada. So, to get back at her, he canceled Nancy's credit cards and made sure she couldn't take any further steps. Nancy was left alone in a foreign country, with 2 young kids and no money to survive. Now, let's go back to Nancy's disappearance. When people learned about the couple's rocky marriage, Nancy's friends and authorities immediately suspected Brad Cooper had something to do with her going missing. Nancy's parents, Carrie and Donna Renz, became even more worried when they got the news that their daughter was missing. They immediately planned a trip to Carrie to help search for her. When Nancy didn't show up by late evening, police came to the Coopers' home and questioned Brad about his wife. He told them that, on Saturday morning, she got up earlier than usual and went for a run with a friend. Brad also mentioned that Nancy never took her cell phone or keys with her. He said she also skipped her usual routine of driving to a coffee shop to meet her running partner. This experienced runner, who had been training for a half marathon, apparently changed her route that day and didn't run on one of her usual trails. The police listened to Brad's story, but they were clearly surprised, since no one other than Brad had seen Nancy that day. The cops needed solid proof to back up Brad's claim that she left the house at 7 a.m. Where were the witnesses besides her husband, who saw her leaving, getting into a car, or even just walking down the street that Saturday morning? There weren't any. No one had seen Nancy since Friday night, when she spent time at a friend's house across the street. Brad claimed she had plans to meet a friend later that day, which was actually her usual running partner. A search party was organized to find the missing runner. Could she have run away to escape her marriage? Not without her kids, her friends would have said. After several days of intense searching, Nancy Cooper's body was found about 3 miles from her home, off her regular running route. A man walking his dog discovered her lying face down in a drainage ditch. He saw her body in a stormwater drain. She was wearing only a sports bra, and there was a single diamond earring in one of her ears. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was strangulation, and her hyoid bone was broken. There were no other injuries or signs of sexual assault on her body, but every murder has a motive, and the police needed to find it. Once Nancy's body was found, many people immediately pointed the finger at Brad. He was the most obvious suspect. Shortly after, Carrie investigators confirmed her death was a homicide. Police searched the couple's home and seized several items as part of the investigation. They reported that Nancy Cooper's phone and keys were found inside the house, though her friends told the police she always took them with her. When police interviewed Brad Cooper on the day his wife went missing, they noticed some small red marks and scratches on the back of his neck. This was noted in the police report, but no official explanation was given. It also became clear that no one other than Brad Cooper had seen Nancy after she left the Friday night party at a neighbor's house, which she attended alone. Although a friend did speak with her on the phone at 10:30 p.m. that same night, no one saw her after that. Investigators kept searching for evidence related to Nancy Cooper's death and worked quickly to identify their prime suspect, and it didn't take long for them to find one. The relationship between the couple caught the investigators' attention, and more importantly, Brad was the last person to see Nancy alive. In homicide investigations, the husband is usually the first person they rule out before they can move on to other suspects. The evidence led the police to issue overnight warrants to search the Coopers' home, their 2 cars, and Brad Cooper himself. It was clear the police were in a hurry to treat the family home and the cars as potential crime scenes. They used luminol to check for bloodstains and searched for other evidence in the house or one of the cars. They also collected Brad's hair, fingerprints, and DNA for comparison with evidence they might find at the crime scene or where the body was found. They also planned to inspect and photograph any cuts, scratches, or other marks on Brad's hands and body. Remember, the Coopers were married, lived in the same house, and often shared a car, so any physical evidence connected to the crime would first need to be explained in the context of normal family life. And some odd details did come to light. Investigators found out that, on the day Nancy disappeared, Brad had spent the morning doing laundry, vacuuming, and mopping the floors. He didn't deny that he had bought bleach and other cleaning supplies the day before. The police found it unusual that he was deep cleaning the house on the very morning his wife went missing. Of course, we don't know if Brad Cooper actually bought the bleach with any sinister intent. The police did take several boxes and bags of potential evidence from the Cooper home, all of which needed to be processed to see if they had any connection to Nancy's death. The information Brad Cooper provided about the extensive cleaning of the residence doesn't match up with what we learned from interviews with people who knew Brad and Nancy during their marriage, the police stated in written testimony. The police also reported that Brad had cleaned the trunk of his wife's car, but not the interior. Brad claimed he had spilled gasoline in the trunk, but the police didn't detect the smell of either gas or cleaning fluid. Prosecutors stated that at the time of Nancy Cooper's death, the couple, both Canadian citizens, were in the process of separating, with plans for Nancy to return to Canada with their kids. However, in April 2008, Brad changed his mind, removed Nancy's name from their bank accounts and credit cards, and took the kids' passports to prevent her from leaving. As part of the investigation, Brad's computer was searched for documents that might contain information on how to kill someone or dispose of a body. Detective Adam Dismuke said during cross-examination that certain areas of the couple's home, including the front hallway, suggested a possible struggle when Nancy returned home from the neighbor's party. As they reviewed dozens of photos taken at the Cooper house, while the case was still being treated as a missing persons investigation, Brad's lawyer, Howard Kurtz, questioned Detective Dismukes, trying to argue that the evidence didn't point to Brad's guilt. The photos showed that some things had been moved or changed between the afternoon of July 11, 2008, when Nancy was home, and the next day. Decorative ducks that had been on the credenza and bamboo sticks in a vase in the foyer were missing in one of the photos, leading the detective to believe a struggle might have taken place there. But Howard Kurtz argued that other items in the hallway weren't disturbed, including a lamp. He pointed out that there were no scuff marks on the floor, and that the police never searched for the missing items. Other things in the house, Kurtz said, also remained untouched, like a glass coffee table and a lamp in the living room, as well as a computer in the home office. During a later interview, according to Dismukes, Brad Cooper said he felt the investigators already saw him as a suspect when the police searched their home. Based on police testimony, Brad Cooper strangled his wife in their Cary home and dumped her body a few miles away. I believe Nancy Cooper came home early on the morning of July 12th, and Mr. Cooper killed her, said Detective Adam Dismukes. After gathering enough evidence, 37-year-old Brad Cooper was arrested in October 2008, more than 3 months after his wife Nancy Cooper was found dead 3 miles from their home in Cary. However, his trial didn't start until over 2 years later, in March 2011. During the 36-day trial, both the prosecution and defense presented their cases to the jury. Even though Brad maintained his innocence, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. The evidence presented during the trial suggested that Brad had been having an affair and was becoming increasingly controlling and abusive toward his wife. The prosecution argued that he killed Nancy to get rid of her and continue his affair. Brad eventually cut Nancy off from their joint bank accounts, and she had told people she wanted to return to Canada with their 2 kids. According to jury foreman Andy Gilbert, the jurors came into the trial with an open mind. Brad Cooper was innocent until proven guilty. In particular, the testimony of 2 FBI agents revealed internet searches on Brad's laptop, including maps of the area where Nancy's was found. The evidence presented by Special Agents Gregory Johnson and Chris Chappell influenced the outcome of the case, said Andy Gilbert. It made a lot of the other circumstantial evidence more relevant and credible. Brad had initially agreed to the divorce and splitting up their assets, but he changed his mind when he realized how expensive it would be. Defense lawyers argued that the couple had financial troubles, and Brad took such steps to protect them from financial ruin. They also claimed he had changed his mind about Canada because he realized he wouldn't be able to see his kids as often as he wanted. In 2011, Brad pled not guilty, but was convicted after the jury reviewed the evidence. The jury of 10 women and 2 men took about 10 hours over 3 days to reach their verdict. On May 5th, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after the longest non-death penalty murder trial in Wake County. Nearly 100 witnesses testified over the 36 days as prosecutors tried to prove that an angry, frustrated Brad Cooper, fed up with his wife, planned and carried out her murder in the early hours of July 12, 2008. After the verdict, Nancy's parents filed a petition in court. They alleged that Brad had been involved in an affair, had yelled at Nancy and verbally abused her. They also claimed Brad was emotionally unstable and a danger to the kids. Court documents revealed that Brad had attempted suicide multiple times as a teenager and again more recently the previous winter. In 2013, he appealed to have his conviction overturned and the case was reviewed for a retrial. While awaiting trial, he pled guilty to second-degree murder and received a sentence of 12 to 15 years, including time already served. Meanwhile, Brad continued to fight Nancy's family for custody of their 2 daughters. However, his guilty plea forfeited his rights, allowing Nancy's twin sister to take custody of the girls. Defense lawyers believe they have a chance of appealing the conviction, claiming that the jury was never allowed to see evidence proving that Brad's laptop had been tampered with. They also argued that the police ignored evidence in their investigation that could have helped identify Nancy's real killer or killers, focusing solely on their Brad did it theory. So, who is Brad Cooper, victim of circumstances or a cruel tyrant? It's known that Brad Cooper attempted suicide as a teenager and threatened to kill himself in the winter of 2008. But suicidal tendencies often point to manipulative motives, a way to prove something to someone when arguments and strength to fight are gone. Bradley continued to maintain his innocence throughout the trial, but in 2015, he finally confessed to killing Nancy, admitting he strangled her during an argument and dumped her body in a drainage ditch. At 40 years old, Brad Cooper pled guilty in Wake County Superior Court to the murder of his wife, Nancy, back in 2008. He had originally been convicted of first-degree murder in 2011, but the North Carolina Court of Appeals overturned that conviction. Judge Paul Gessner then sentenced Cooper to 12 years in prison, giving him credit for the 5 years he had already served. Brad Cooper remained in the Wake County Justice Center under a deal that reduced his life sentence without parole after he pled guilty to second-degree murder. Following his successful appeal of the first-degree murder conviction in 2011, his sentence was reduced to a minimum of 12 years. The unfaithful husband confessed to killing his wife only years after dumping her body, dressed only in a bra, in a drainage ditch, before reporting her missing after a run. Brad answered yes when the judge asked if he had killed Nancy, the mother of their 2 children, and hidden her body at a construction site in Cary, North Carolina, in 2008. This was the first time he had admitted to the crime in court. According to prosecutors, Brad, now in his 50s, was having affairs with several women, including a neighbor, while his wife was trying to end the marriage and move back to Canada. As part of the agreement, Cooper also gave up his parental rights to their daughters, Katie, now 8, and Bella, now 10, allowing them to be adopted by Nancy's twin sister, Krista Lister. After the hearing, Nancy's father, Harry Renz, said, "When we started this process many years ago, I said I wanted the person responsible for this crime to come forward, admit guilt, and acknowledge their actions. Finally, that's happened." Nancy was a 34-year-old athlete and mother of 2 young girls. She was in a troubled marriage and had asked her husband to move out and let her leave their home, but he refused and dealt with it in his own way. After serving his 12-year sentence, Bradley Graham Cooper was released from the Mountain View Correctional Institution in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, on November 23, 2020. Immediately upon release, he was taken into custody by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to begin the process of deporting him back to Canada. As of now, he reportedly lives in Canada but has no rights to contact either of his daughters. These days, it seems he prefers to stay under the radar and avoid public attention. People in Brad Cooper's position need to learn how to meet their needs in relationships honestly, how to compromise, communicate, and listen, and how to build connections where they're also heard and understood. It's harder than getting your way through manipulation, but it's far more productive and offers a real chance for closeness, self-awareness, and freedom from the crushing weight of loneliness. Nancy's murder is a case of domestic violence at its worst, and I urge anyone in a difficult relationship right now to take the steps necessary to ensure their safety. Don't wait, and don't think it couldn't happen to you. Story 2. Sometimes one person's life can trigger a chain of irreversible events that end up destroying entire families. The line between sorrow and hatred is often so thin that once you cross it, there's no going back. In a small village, when the quiet hides a storm of human emotions, unseen threads of jealousy, betrayal, and revenge can tie people up, pushing them to act in the dark. This story is about how intense emotions can tear apart not only lives, but even the closest relationships. The question is, who's ready to pay the price for unbearable grief, and what will it cost those left behind? The cry of a baby shattered the silence of the night, as a man, drenched in sweat from fear, rushed up to the second floor of his house. He had no idea what was waiting for him, but his heart was pounding. In the bedroom, he was met with a horrifying scene. His wife, Maiva, was lying face down on the floor, covered in blood. Next to her, under her arm, was their son, crying uncontrollably. The man was frozen with terror and confusion. What could have happened? Just a few hours earlier, everything seemed normal. His shift at the restaurant had ended late. It was a wedding party, and he'd already told his wife he'd be home later than usual. They had been texting back and forth all evening, but around midnight, Maiva's messages stopped. He figured she had just fallen asleep, exhausted. There was nothing to worry about. The house was quiet when he got home at 12:49 a.m., and although the door was unlocked, he didn't think much of it. The only unusual thing was the silence and the TV being off. And now, standing in front of this terrifying scene, he couldn't make sense of it. Maybe she had fallen and hurt herself? He dialed 911, unsure of what to do. The operator gave him instructions on how to perform CPR, and he started giving his wife chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth. But as he worked, it slowly dawned on him that she was already gone. The paramedics arrived around 3 a.m. and officially declared her dead. Their son was unharmed, but what exactly caused Maiva's death was still a mystery. The investigators who arrived at the young family's home couldn't have predicted the grim reality of what had happened. Blood spattered across the walls, and even the ceiling pointed to a brutal struggle. But they quickly realized this wasn't just a typical case of domestic violence or an accidental fall. The woman's skull was almost completely crushed, and her body showed signs of multiple blows. Bruises on her hands and back indicated that she had fought hard to protect herself and her son during the attack. By around 2:48 a.m., emergency responders were already on the scene, but by then, it was clear. This was a cold-blooded murder. The medical examiner later confirmed the brutality of the attack. She had been hit with extreme violence, but there was no evidence of sexual assault. And although at first it seemed like it could have been a robbery, that theory fell apart when Maiva's purse, along with her personal belongings and money, was found the next morning near a pond close to the restaurant. All the evidence pointed to Maiva being the target. The only question left was, who could commit such a vicious crime? The police started digging into the family's past. At first glance, Maiva and her husband, Alan, seemed to have a peaceful life. They had known each other since childhood, grew up in the same village, and went to the same school. Their life appeared to be full of happiness. Soon after their wedding, they found out they were expecting a child, and their son Lorenzo was born a year later. The family moved into a small house, and Maiva had plans to open a nail salon. They had even picked out a bigger house for the business. But just 3 weeks before the move, everything changed. Maiva's death was so unexpected that her loved ones couldn't believe it. And even though their life seemed perfect on the surface, the investigation uncovered dark secrets within the family. It turned out that Alan was involved in illegal activities related to drug dealing. He had run-ins with the law, and while Maiva was aware of this, she was strongly against his involvement in anything like that. After Alan's arrest, she even turned down an offer to buy a car for 100,000 euros, earned through his shady operations, saying she didn't want dirty money. Her frustration extended to all of Alan's friends, who came by for business deals. Maiva wouldn't let him meet with them, which annoyed some of his acquaintances. Some of these people, including old school friends, weren't happy with Maiva's interference, which led to conflicts. Maiva's relatives believed these connections might have led to her murder. They thought Alan owed someone a large sum of money, and the crime was meant to send a message. However, Alan insisted that no one in his circle would be capable of such a crime. He immediately told the police about all his contacts and business dealings, assuring them he had no outstanding debts or serious conflicts. Moreover, the police quickly ruled out the possibility of a criminal dispute. The house where Maiva was killed was in perfect order. Nothing had been stolen except for that one purse, and as it turned out, nothing had been taken from it either. But the investigation took a new turn. The police discovered that 6 months before the crime, Maiva and her husband had been receiving threats from an elderly couple in a neighboring village. The threats stemmed from a conflict involving Maiva's father's best friend. Investigators started tracking down where this couple was on the night of the murder. The small village was shocked as the horrifying details of the crime came to light. No one could believe that the man who regularly visited Maiva's father and supported him through tough times turned out to be guilty. It all began with 2 witnesses who noticed strange behavior that night, and their testimony was the key to cracking the case. The first witness, a young doctor, was out for a late-night walk with his baby in a stroller when he saw a man wearing pink rubber gloves. The man was clearly trying to avoid being seen, and when he noticed the doctor, he quickly turned away. The doctor remembered his odd behavior and even recalled part of the license plate number from the car he saw nearby. The second witness, who was driving home with his wife, also recognized this man. He reported seeing Ribeiroi slowly driving down the street, carefully looking around. It seemed suspicious, so the man decided to alert the police. The investigators didn't waste any time. They tapped the Ribeiroi family's phone. This move paid off. During one conversation, Ribeiroi's wife, Enda, unintentionally gave her husband away. She was talking to a friend, telling her how that night her husband had come home with Maiva's purse, the same one that went missing on the day of the crime. He showed it to her and coldly said, "See, I did it." The police immediately arrested the couple, and soon after, Ribeiroi confessed. Ribeiroi had lost his son, Rudolph, a few months before, and he couldn't cope with the grief. On that fateful night, he first had dinner at a friend's house and then went to the cemetery to tend to his son's grave. He took the gloves and shoes he usually used for cemetery work. After leaving the grave, he was overcome with rage. He got into his car and drove to Alan and Maiva's house. With a baseball bat that he always kept in his car, he easily got into the house. The door wasn't locked. When Ru went up to the second floor, where Maiva and her son were sleeping, Maiva woke up. She recognized him right away, but before she could say or do anything, Ru hit her multiple times with the bat. He later reenacted the entire crime during a police investigation. After the murder, he grabbed Maiva's purse, walked out of the house, and went home. Once there, he showed the purse to his wife and then got rid of it. The next day, he burned the baseball bat in the fireplace. When the villagers found out that Ribeiroi was the killer, their shock was beyond words. They couldn't believe that the man who had been supporting Maiva's father, asking about the police investigation and constantly inquiring about any new findings, was the same person who committed the crime. He even asked if they had found her purse or discovered any clues at the crime scene. So why did Ribeiroi commit such a brutal act? It all tied back to his son Rudolph. 8 months before the murder, on August 21, 2011, Rudolph was in a car accident while speeding toward Alan and Maiva's house to have it out with them. On the way, he lost control of the car, skidded off the road, and died just minutes after the crash. Ru blamed Alan and Maiva for his son's death, and his anger grew by the day. Every morning, Enda Ribeiroi, Ru's wife, would light candles at an altar dedicated to her son. Their house was filled with photos of Rudolph, surrounded by somber symbols of loss, and quiet conversations with his spirit became part of her daily routine. She was convinced that his death wasn't just a tragic accident, and she searched for answers every day. On the night Rudolph died in the crash, something shifted in her mind. Her heart was consumed with hatred and a thirst for revenge. Since then, Enda couldn't stay calm. She didn't believe the official story, nor did she trust the investigators or the forensic experts who said her son had simply lost control of the car. The fact that Rudolph's body was found outside the car and the seatbelt marks didn't match his position in the vehicle made her think that someone else had been driving. Nothing could convince her that Rudolph died by accident. Despite all the forensic reports, including DNA tests and phone records, Enda was certain her son was murdered. She collected evidence, took photos of anything related to the tragedy, and was determined to find the person responsible. Even months after the accident, she made her husband drill a hole into Rudolph's grave, hoping to record his voice with a tape recorder and get answers from the other side. But gradually, her hatred became focused on two people, Alan and Maiva. In Enda's mind, she formed a dark theory that they were responsible for her son's death. Her hatred for Maiva grew even stronger as more details about their relationship came to light. Many years ago, when Maiva and Rudolph were teenagers, they dated, and to everyone else it seemed like a typical teenage romance. But for Maiva, he was her first real love. She was deeply in love with Rudolph in her younger years. But over time, she realized he wasn't the kind of person she could build a life with. His cheating and constant drama ruined their relationship, and by 2009, Maiva decided to end things with him. She found comfort and support in Alan, who soon became her fiancé. However, Rudolph couldn't handle the fact that Maiva had moved on. Even after she got pregnant, he wouldn't leave her alone. Maiva told her mom that one time Rudolph tried to kiss her on a bridge, but she pushed him away. Soon after, Maiva gave birth, but that didn't stop Rudolph. His obsessive behavior continued, and he kept texting her, begging to start over. Seeing that Rudolph wouldn't back off, Alan decided to step in. He met with Rudolph and warned him that he wouldn't tolerate the harassment any longer. But even after that, Rudolph kept sending messages. So Alan took those messages and showed them to Crystal, Rudolph's girlfriend at the time. That ended their relationship. Crystal broke up with Rudolph after finding out he was still obsessed with his ex. This loss pushed Rudolph over the edge. On that fateful night, he got drunk at a bar and, grabbing a hammer, decided to drive over to Alan's house. He was determined to confront him. People at the bar saw him and felt like something bad was about to happen. When police cars and ambulances sped by shortly after, many already guessed what had gone down. Rudolph never made it to Alan's house. His car veered off the road at a curve, and he died at the scene, despite the paramedics' attempts to save him. His death was a shock to everyone, but it hit his mother the hardest. From that moment on, she dedicated her life to finding someone to blame. Enda blamed Maiva for her son's death. She would show up at her house and threaten her, saying that Maiva would pay for her son being in the grave. Scared, Maiva filed a police report, detailing how Rudolph's mother had threatened to kill her. This report was supposed to ease the tension, but it only made things worse. Every day, Enda told her husband that Maiva was to blame for their loss, and that he needed to do something about it. In the end, Rubroit started to believe that it was his destiny to avenge his son's death. 2 months before the tragedy, he showed up at Maiva and Alan's house, with threats and accusations. Staring down at Maiva, he said she was responsible for his son Rudolph's death, and that he wouldn't stop until he got his revenge. He mentioned his connections and money, adding insults that only escalated the tension in the family. This warning was a dark omen of the horror that would unfold later. 8 months after Rudolph's death, Barrowy moved from words to actions. He broke into Alan and Maiva's home when she was the only one there, asleep next to their young son, Lorenzo. In that fatal moment, she found herself trapped, face to face with a man consumed by rage, which had completely overtaken his ability to think clearly. This uncontrollable fury ended in a horrific outcome. Investigators were still working to determine what role his wife, Enda Barrowy, had played in the crime. Though Enda claimed she had nothing to do with the murder, she was involved in its aftermath. When Rue came home after what he'd done, she told him to get rid of Maiva's purse, the one piece of evidence that could have shed light on what happened that night. In her testimony, Enda denied knowing about her husband's plans. She said he had completely lost his mind and acted on his own. She insisted to investigators that she had never asked him to do anything and didn't know he had committed the crime because of her. Still, despite her claims, suspicions of her involvement lingered. Her behavior during the trial spoke volumes. Enda seemed more concerned about her own fate, nervously glancing at the lawyers, reporters, and judges. She was more worried about the possibility of getting a 3-year prison sentence than the fact that her husband was facing life behind bars. On the witness stand, she showed no remorse for what had happened, focusing only on avoiding jail time herself. During the trial, Rue Barrowy didn't admit to planning the murder in advance. The issue of whether his wife had provoked him never came up in court, but many believed Enda played a part in the crime. She had manipulated her husband, constantly pressuring him to believe that he needed to act, something he might never have done on his own. Even in the courtroom, she cast cold, controlling glances at him, as if still trying to direct his testimony. In the end, Ruberowi was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the murder of Maiva. His wife, Enda, received a 2-year sentence for ordering the destruction of Maiva's purse, a key piece of evidence. Maiva's relatives felt the punishment was too light, especially for Enda, whom they saw as the manipulator who pushed her husband to commit the crime. However, neither Ru nor Enda appealed the sentences. After Maiva's death, their son Lorenzo was left alone. At first, he was cared for by a child psychologist to help him cope with the loss of his mother. Eventually, Lorenzo went to live with other relatives, and his life slowly began to stabilize. There's little known about what happened to Alan. What remains in the hearts of those who knew Maiva are the photos and videos of a woman whose life was brutally cut short by hatred and revenge aimed at her family. This story is a powerful example of how hate, grief, and the inability to cope with loss can destroy not just one life, but entire families. The tragedy began with the death of Rudolf, who was a victim of his own recklessness, but for his parents, it was an unbearable loss. Enda Barowi's obsession with revenge led to even greater harm, as she manipulated her husband, feeding off his pain, and ultimately drove him to commit a horrific crime. Maiva and her son Lorenzo became innocent victims of destructive emotions that no one could control. While Ruberowi was responsible for his actions, he was driven by guilt and hatred, skillfully fueled by his wife. This tragedy highlights how important it is to manage grief before it turns into a desire for revenge. In the end, neither revenge nor punishment brought peace to anyone involved in this drama. One family lost a daughter, mother, and wife, while another lost a son. Story 5. Gullibility, naivety, and being overly trusting. These traits can be dangerous, sometimes costing a person their life. Yet we all have moments when we want to believe in miracles, that childhood dreams can still come true. When something you've longed for seems so close, you can almost touch it. Caution, common sense, and even self-preservation can take a back seat. It's exactly this vulnerability that criminals prey upon. The case of a young French woman named Elodie Morel in 2005 shocked the country with its brutality and inhumanity. What made it even more horrifying was the cold indifference of ordinary people who knew about her captivity and impending fate, but chose silence for a quick profit. This is a story about how not all dreams come true, and why you can't blindly trust someone who promises to make a fairy tale come to life. Who was Elodie Morel? Elodie Morel was born on February 18, 1976 in Marseille. From a young age, she had a striking, almost angelic appearance. As she grew older, Elodie blossomed into a stunning beauty, with many suggesting she belonged on TV or on the cover of glossy magazines. As a teenager, she became obsessed with the idea of becoming a model. But coming from a humble family, no one took her dreams seriously. In the 90s, Elodie sent her photos to various modeling agencies several times but never got a response. After graduating high school, she went to college, married a classmate named Sylvain at 22, and had a son by the age of 25. It seemed like she had let go of her dream of becoming a model for good. By 2005, Elodie was working as a sales associate at a trendy clothing store in downtown Marseille. She frequently received compliments and noticed the admiring or jealous looks thrown her way. At 29, she still had a perfect figure, beautiful facial features, and could easily pass for someone in her early 20s. Even though Elodie never fully gave up on her dream of becoming a model, she no longer talked about it, convinced her time had passed. But in April 2005, she filled out an online application, attached her best photos, and indicated that she was still interested in pursuing a modeling career. The response didn't take long, but the enticing offer from a fashion photographer turned out to be an invitation to slow, agonizing death, a trap for the trusting. Around 2 weeks after she posted her profile online, Elodie received a flattering and tempting offer. She could become the new face of the famous English luxury car company, Rolls-Royce. The contract offered a payment of €1,000 per day for a photo shoot, But to finalize the deal, she had to meet with the photographer and do a test shoot. The meeting was set for May 2nd at a bar in the town of Aguamortes. Thrilled, Elodie shared the news with her husband. Although he was skeptical, he didn't argue. Early that morning, the young mother left her son with her parents, got in her car, and headed to the arranged location. She planned to stay in Aguamortes for 3 days and had already booked a hotel room. That evening, Elodie called her husband to tell him she was on her way to the meeting and feeling nervous. Sylvain wished her luck and asked her to call as soon as she could. It would be the last time he ever spoke to his wife. The last meeting, Elodie arrived at the bar as planned and sat at a table on the terrace, waiting to meet the female photographer she had supposedly been emailing with. But instead, about 10 minutes later, a man in his mid-40s joined her at the table. He introduced himself as the photographer's assistant, explaining that he'd been sent to meet her and pick out locations for the shoot scheduled for the next day. Having no real experience in the modeling world, Elodie didn't sense anything suspicious and took him at his word. The man looked professional, spoke convincingly, and seemed to know all the details from her previous conversations with the photographer. Their chat flowed easily, focusing on Elodie's potential career. In her mind, she was already envisioning herself gracing the covers of popular magazines and thinking about how she would spend the money she would earn. Around 9 p.m., as darkness had fully set in, the man suggested they go scout for the perfect location for the next day's shoot. Aguasmortes, a charming medieval town, is filled with picturesque towers, fortresses, and chapels. Plenty of spots for a stunning photo shoot. Excited and still unsuspecting of any danger, Elodie left the bar with her new acquaintance and got into his car. She was never seen alive again. What's chilling is that another man who knew the perpetrator personally and had heard about his vile intentions witnessed the entire interaction. He tried to intervene, but unfortunately, his efforts were in vain. A frightened informant that same evening, on May 2nd, a call came into the Aguasmortes police station. A frantic man claimed that a young woman was in grave danger and something needed to be done immediately. He didn't know the name of the potential victim or where she might have been taken, but he was sure there wasn't much time to act. The caller was 63-year-old Dominique Tarasco, a nightclub owner who often worked as an informant for the police, providing them with confidential information. He said that earlier that night, he had seen an acquaintance of his, Guillaume Mengo, at the bar. Mengo had ties to the criminal underworld and was known to be a cruel and dangerous man. The previous day, Mengo had bragged about meeting a naive pretty girl online, whom he planned to kidnap and sell to a brothel in Spain for a hefty price. However, starting the search was difficult. The police had no solid leads, no name, no location, but they knew time was of the essence. By the next morning, they had a name: Elodie Morel. Her worried family contacted the police, reporting that she had been missing since the previous evening and that her phone was off. They explained that she had left for a photo shoot in another town and then simply vanished. At first, the police didn't connect this disappearance to the call from the informant. They suspected Elodie might have run off with a lover, but her family insisted that she would never abandon her young son or disappear without a word. The search for Elodie didn't begin until 3 days after she had gone missing. Precious time wasted. Tragically, Elodie was still alive for 2 of those days, held captive in a house in Aguasmortes, where she was tortured and abused while her captors decided how to get rid of her. Interrogation of the witness and arrest of the suspects on May 5, 2005. The lead investigator handling Elodie Morel's disappearance began to suspect that she was the same mysterious woman in danger that the informant had warned about. Dominique was summoned to the station to give a formal statement, and when shown a photo of Elodie, he immediately confirmed that she was the woman he had seen 3 days earlier in the bar with Guillaume Mangot. When asked where he thought Mangot might be holding the victim, Dominique mentioned he'd heard something about an empty nightclub on the north side of town that had recently shut down. A police team set up a stakeout at the location, and by that evening, they apprehended 48-year-old Guillaume Mangot and 53-year-old Richard Ligna as they arrived at the building. The role of the second man in this crime was still unclear and required further investigation. During a search of Mangot, police found Elodie Morel's credit card in one of his pockets, leaving no doubt about his involvement in her disappearance. Both men were brought to the station for questioning, though Lenya was released after a few hours due to a lack of evidence against him. Lenya lived with his family on the outskirts of town and had a friendly relationship with Guillaume, but had never been in trouble with the law himself. The first story initially, Mangot claimed he didn't know Elodie and had simply stolen her credit card. According to his first version of events, he was at the bar on May 2nd when he noticed an attractive, well-dressed woman. He assumed she must have money and decided to rob her. Guillaume sat down at Elodie's table, complimented her, and offered to buy her a coffee. She mentioned she was waiting for someone but didn't ask him to leave. They chatted briefly, and at some point he managed to swipe her credit card from the purse hanging on her chair, slipping away before she noticed it was missing. Mangot admitted to knowing the victim but claimed the entire incident was spontaneous, insisting he only stole her card and had nothing to do with her disappearance. Investigators confirmed he had used the stolen card the same day, withdrawing cash from an ATM on the outskirts of town. However, he couldn't explain how he knew the PIN if Elodie hadn't told him. His story sounded shaky at best. On top of that, a background check revealed that Mangot had multiple prior convictions, including armed robbery, drug trafficking, and a 9-year prison sentence for a brutal rape. Despite his criminal history, Mangot hadn't changed his ways after being released, though he'd become more careful, trying to avoid another trip to prison. The second story, things took a turn when police found Elodie's phone number in Mangot's phone along with their email exchanges about the photo shoot. This discovery completely contradicted his initial story, forcing him to change his account. He confessed that he had stumbled across Elodie's online modeling profile and started messaging her, pretending to be a photographer. The naive beauty was an easy target and quickly agreed to meet without asking too many questions. Since Mangot had been using a female alias to communicate with her, he was nervous that she might become suspicious when a man showed up instead of the photographer she was expecting. But Elodie, trusting and eager, didn't find anything strange and agreed to go with him to scout for a photo shoot location late at night, even getting into his car without hesitation, something witnesses later confirmed. Once they drove to a secluded area, Guillaume veered off the main road and stopped the car. He pulled out a gun and demanded that Elodie hand over her credit card. When she refused, he grabbed her purse and found the card himself. Then he began demanding the PIN, but she still wouldn't give it to him. Furious, he slammed her head against the dashboard and started choking her until she finally relented and gave him the code. Afterward, Mangot locked Elodie in the trunk and drove to the nearest ATM to check if she had told him the truth. The PIN worked and he drained her account. But with the money in hand, he started contemplating his next move. What to do with the woman now locked in his trunk, hiding the victim and the arrest of the accomplices Guillaume Mangot. Needing time to figure out what to do, he decided to hide Elodie for a while and drove to his friend Richard Lenya's house. He told Richard about the woman locked in his trunk, mentioning his plan to sell her and make a big profit, which he was willing to share. It's important to note that Richard and his wife had previously worked at the same abandoned nightclub. He as a security guard and she as a cleaner. But when the club shut down, they both lost their jobs and were barely scraping by, with Richard turning to heavy drinking. Richard agreed to help and handed Guillaume the keys to his empty garage, offering it as a place to stash the woman. He didn't want to have any direct contact with the captive himself, preferring to wait for Guillaume to figure things out and hoping to get his cut of the money soon. As later investigations revealed, Elodie was held captive for over 2 days, enduring a nightmare of torture, assault, beatings, and the agony of hunger and thirst. According to Guillaume, he and Elodie talked a lot during those 2 days, particularly about their children, who were close in age. Elodie begged him to let her go, pleading that her son needed her. Guillaume claimed that at one point he actually felt sorry for her and was considering letting her go. He even brought her a bottle of water because it was unbearably hot in the garage and she had already been there for 2 days. However, on the evening of May 4th, things took a drastic turn when Richard, heavily drunk, decided it was time to deal with the captive. Guillaume claimed that while he was away, Richard entered the garage and strangled Elodie with a rope. Guillaume insisted he had no part in the actual crime and only helped dispose of the body. However, he refused to reveal where they had hidden her remains. The search of the Ligny residence when police raided the Ligny house with a search warrant, the couple appeared nervous, but not particularly surprised by the events. They let the officers in without resistance and continued eating at the kitchen table, showing little interest in the ongoing search. During the investigation, police found several items belonging to Elodie in their teenage daughter's room, including her cell phone, some jewelry, a hair clip, and a wristwatch. Additionally, Elodie's purse and wallet were discovered in the possession of Richard's wife. Other belongings, as well as torn pieces of the victim's clothing, were found in the trash bin outside the house. Even more disturbing evidence surfaced during the search of Richard's garage, located near their home. Inside the empty space, investigators found brown stains that appeared to be dried blood. They also found crumpled tissues, cigarette butts, an empty plastic bottle, and a piece of laundry rope. Both Richard and his wife were taken into custody, while their 14-year-old daughter was temporarily placed with relatives. When questioned about how Elodie's belongings ended up in their home, the couple claimed that Guillaume had brought everything in exchange for letting him use their garage. They admitted to knowing he was holding a woman there, but chose not to interfere, as Guillaume had promised to reward them. They also confessed to giving him a bottle of water and a piece of rope upon his request, without asking why. The third story. Forensics confirmed that the brown stains on the garage floor were Elodie's blood. Even more damning, semen found on the crumpled tissues matched Guillaume's DNA, and saliva on the cigarette butts belonged to both the victim and the kidnapper. Elodie's family insisted she had never smoked in her life, as she suffered from asthma and cigarette smoke triggered severe coughing and choking fits. The horrifying picture became clear. Guillaume had kept Elodie in the garage for 2 days, repeatedly assaulting her, likely torturing her, and forcing her to smoke as part of his abuse. Changing stories and evidence. When investigators presented the forensic results to Guillaume Mangat, he once again changed his story. This time, he claimed that he and Elodie had indeed been intimate in the garage, but that was entirely consensual. He said they had smoked together and talked a lot, and he had finally decided to let her go. However, he continued to insist that Richard Lenia had killed her while he was away, supposedly because Richard feared that Elodie might go to the police after Guillaume released her. This version of events had many inconsistencies, the biggest being that Richard had no reason to kill Elodie. First, he had never even seen the captive, and she hadn't seen him or members of his family. Second, she had been brought to the garage in the trunk of a car, meaning she had no idea where she was and wouldn't have been able to lead the police there. Lastly, Richard was an ordinary drunk, incapable of causing physical harm to anyone. He was content with being paid in the form of Elodie's belongings and the promise of money from his friend once everything was over. The fourth story, as mentioned earlier, investigators found an empty plastic water bottle in the garage. Guillaume had claimed that he'd taken pity on Elodie and brought her some water. However, tests showed that the remaining drops of liquid in the bottle contained a high dose of powerful drugs. After consuming such a cocktail, Elodie would likely have been unconscious or barely conscious, allowing her to do whatever he wanted. When asked why he had drugged her, Guillaume changed his story again. Now, he claimed that he had been ready to release her, and they had even agreed that she wouldn't go to the police. According to him, Elodie just wanted to go home to her family and forget about everything as if it had been a bad dream, but she allegedly tried to escape, leading to a struggle in which he hit her, explaining the bloodstains on the garage floor, then locked her inside and left. Guillaume said he had given Elodie the drugs to calm her down and prevent another escape attempt. He crushed some pills and dissolved them in water, then left the garage, returning 12 hours later. By then, Elodie was on the brink of collapse from dehydration. She quickly drank the water, not noticing the strange taste, and passed out within minutes. According to Guillaume, she died accidentally from an overdose, because her weakened body couldn't handle the drugs, something he claimed he hadn't considered. Once he realized she was no longer breathing, he placed her body in the trunk of her own car, which had been left in the parking lot near the bar where they first met. A few hours later, he drove the car to Richard's property, using the keys he had taken from Elodie. Even though Guillaume still refused to say where he had taken the car with the body, there were more inconsistencies in his story. For example, the rope found in the garage had sweat and skin residue from both Elodie and Guillaume, indicating that he had likely strangled her. All the evidence pointed against the suspect, and he knew it. Hoping to reduce his sentence, Guillaume struck a deal with investigators and revealed that he had abandoned the car near the old cemetery in Aigues-Mortes. The vehicle was found on May 7th, exactly where he said it would be. It had been sitting in the scorching sun for 3 days, and the body in the trunk had already begun to decompose. The autopsy showed clear signs of torture, beatings, and strangulation. The victim had been tied up, drugged, sexually assaulted, and in the end, strangled to death with a rope. The trial and sentencing. The trial of the 3 people involved in the crime didn't begin until February 2008, nearly 3 years after the horrific events. Guillaume Mangot was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. As for Richard Ligne and his wife, they desperately tried to convince the jury that they hadn't known about the captive in their garage. They claimed they had simply allowed an old friend to stay with them for a few days without asking questions. But the discovery of Elodie's belongings in their home proved otherwise. The couple was charged with aiding and abetting and sentenced to 6 years in prison each. In 2010, Guillaume Mangot and his lawyer appealed the decision, trying to shift some of the responsibility for the crime onto the Ligne. This was their only hope of reducing his life sentence and lowering the minimum time he'd have to serve. On May 4, 2010, exactly 5 years after Elodie Morel's murder, the new trial began. During the hearings, it was proven that Richard and his wife had known about Elodie's captivity and the mortal danger she was in. Yet they did nothing. Not only did they keep her belongings, even giving some of them to their daughter, but they also provided Guillaume with everything he asked for: rope, water, and more, without questioning his intentions or considering the consequences. The court reduced Guillaume Mangot's life sentence to 30 years, with a requirement that he serve 2/3 of the sentence before being eligible for parole. The Ligne, for their complicity and failure to act, were each sentenced to 9 years in prison without the possibility of early release. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope the stories gave you something to think about, or dream about. Sleep well, stay safe, and don't forget to subscribe. Good night.